Namo Abdulla, and welcome to Inside America. Once an isolated, poverty and war-stricken region of Iraq, Kurdistan has emerged as an influential oil power in the Middle East over the past few years. Shortly after the 2003 US-led invasion of Iraq, international oil companies, including giants such as Exxon-Mobil, Total and Chevron, arrived in this small autonomous region to exploit its abundant natural resources. Last week, Kurdistan attracted more global attention from politicians and businessmen alike after Turkey agreed to enter a multi-billion-dollar oil and gas deal with it. But there is one problem. Kurdistan's aggressive pursuit of an independent oil policy has infuriated Iraq's central government in Baghdad, which considers all of the region's hydrocarbon deals illegal. Baghdad says it retains the sole authority over the country's oil industry and fears that independent moves by Kurdistan would end up in the demise of the country as a unified entity. Kurdistan rejects that claim, saying that its oil policy benefited the whole of Iraq, since the revenues will eventually be redistributed to all Iraqis. But what is the U.S. stance toward Kurdistan's oil policy? Does it share Baghdad's fears that Kurdistan's increasingly independent economy leads to the emergence of an independent Kurdish state in northern Iraq? Well, joining me to discuss this subject is Joshua Walker, a writer who has recently written an extensive report on Turkey-KRG relations. KRG is the Kurdistan regional government. He's also the president of global programs at APCO Worldwide. Ömer Zarpli is the other guest joining us today. He's a Turkish expert at the Century Foundation here in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us. Joshua, I'd like to start off with this multi-billion oil and gas deal that Turkey went ahead with the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq, and it did defy Baghdad by doing that.
Yeah.
Can you tell me why how Turkey could do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think you need to look at the context here. What would have seemed very surprising a decade ago, when clearly Ankara and Erbil were not on the same page at all. The Kurdish problem is not just a regional problem, it's also an internal Turkish domestic problem. And I think a lot of the relations that we're seeing between Ankara, Erbil, and Baghdad are reflective of domestic politics in Turkey. I think the last couple of years, as the government in Turkey, the Justice and Development Party, has been trying to woo its own population, it's realized the most effective way to work with the Kurdish population within the Republic of Turkey is to work with the KRG. And as a result, this multi-billion-dollar deal that you're talking about is good for economic development in the region. The most economically depressed region of Turkey is the southeastern part, which happens to be predominantly Kurdish. And so in many ways, this is the real driver. This could be the real potential that could change the main area that's been a real deficit for Turkey into a major positive. And so I think over the last 2 to 3 years, you've seen a real shift in policy, Turkish foreign policy, of being focused mostly, just like the United States, on Baghdad to become more focused on Erbil and the KRG area. And I think the historic developments we've seen even in the last week with the Prime Minister of Turkey and Barzani of KRG coming to Diyarbakir, the hotbed of Kurdish nationalism in Turkey, and declaring and using the word Kurdistan for the very first time. You know, when I've worked on Turkey, if I use that word openly, many of my Turkish friends would not be very happy. And still in Turkey, there's an active debate about these things. But I think that you begin to see the economic drivers having a political implication, and the political implications having economic effects in the long term.
And in your report, you're talking about the significance of this relation to the United States. Can you tell me where the United States is amid all of these conflicts and disputes?
Absolutely. I mean, this report is one of the first reports that's ever looked at it from a positive perspective, because so often for Americans, when we talk about Iraq, it's usually a negative sense. We went into the war, we had internal divisions in the U.S., and the only bright spot, the only good part of this whole war is the KRG. It's the fact that KRG has done the best in all of Iraq, economically speaking. And I think one of the major problems that we've always had is U.S. bilateral relations with Baghdad, with Erbil, and with Ankara have all been individual. We haven't thought about it in a broader strategic framework. And so what the report really highlights is trying to figure out how can the United States work with Turkey, with the KRG, and with the Iraq central government to find a way for everybody to be a winner here. And I think one of the keys here is to first admit and understand that Turkey has a big role here. We always talk about Iran having a negative role and being one of the bad guys. It's time to bring Turkey in and think about how we can work together to figure out these regional problems, because without your big regional players, it's not realistic to think about ideas in the future.
Ömer, I'd like to bring you here as a Turkish expert. You lived in Turkey for a long time, and you are from Turkey. Can you tell me how the Turkish society thinks, or that Turkish people think about this rapprochement between the Kurdistan regional government and Turkey? This is really unprecedented in the modern history of Turkey to have ties as strong as they are now with the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq.
I think it is so far surprisingly welcoming that most of the Turkish people view the dealings with the agreement with the KRG within the frame of commercial dealings. They see this as a commercial dealing that would help Turkey improve economically. This is surprising because of the reason Joshua just talked about, that even the word Kurdistan irritates many people. It is not. And historically, Turkey saw the developments in the northern Iraq with suspicion. It feared that it would embolden the Kurds in Turkey to seek greater autonomy and ultimately independence. So, therefore, I think so far we haven't seen much.
So, as a Turkish writer, as somebody from Turkey, do you credit Prime Minister Erdogan for all the developments? Is it because, if you do, is it because he's more like this kind of Islamist-leaning prime minister-leaning politician, or is it just because Turkey has changed?
No, I think he's a very, very pragmatist politician. I think he sees that there's a great potential in northern Iraq. It's a great energy reserve, and Turkey desperately needs energy. So I think he looks at the issue very from a pragmatic point of view, and I think he thinks that this will help Turkey greatly.
So you think his Islamism plays no role? I mean, I used to read some Turkish writers saying that the nationalist parties such as MHP and CHP, they cannot basically have a solution for the Kurdish issue in Turkey because they see it from this exclusive Kemalist perception that Turkey is a Turkish state and whoever lives in it is a Turkish state. But Erdogan is more like an Islamist leader who believes like they're all Muslims, they can all live together, and we can easily recognize their identity.
Well, I think here we should, separate the issue between Turkey's relations with KRG and Turkey's relations with its own Kurds. I think Turkey's relations with KRG is definitely a good thing, and it certainly has symbolic significance because, as I said, it destroys this taboo about Kurds and the Kurdistan, definitely. And that's why the Diyarbakir meeting was symbolically very important. Mr. Erdogan's using the word Kurdistan and Chevron coming to Turkey after 37 years. It had symbolic significance. But I think that's it. It has symbolic significance. In order for Turkey to solve its own Kurdish issue, it has to deal with its own Kurds.
I mean, it definitely has symbolic significance, as he says. The mere utterance of the word Kurdistan by Prime Minister Erdogan showed that Turkey does not have the kind of fears it used to have about the emergence of a Kurdish state in northern Iraq. But why does the United States still hold this position that all the deals, all the foreign deals, should be done through Baghdad? This is what we heard from the State Department last week.
No, I think that the U.S. position, actually here, the Turkish position is the same in many ways. And I think there's a difference between official positions and then track two and ways of trying to negotiate around. I think everybody agrees that having a strong central Iraq, in other words, having a sovereign, independent Iraq, is a good thing. The problem has been the economic disparity between the security situation in Baghdad, which continues to deteriorate in other parts of Iraq, and the relative stability and the freedom that many people in northern Iraq enjoy. And I think that Turkey, as my friend has just said, the Prime Minister is very pragmatic and says, look, we need to do something for our region of the world. We need to focus on figuring out how to do a pipeline deal that will go from Iraq, taking natural energy resources out to the European markets, to Western markets. Turkey has become a major kind of consumer of energy, so it makes natural sense for this pipeline to go there, but at the same time, they want to work together. And, you know, I think in many ways, personalities mattered here. You talked a lot about Erdogan's personality. His feud with Prime Minister Maliki in Iraq has a lot to do with why the KRG, and particularly Barzani and Erdogan, have become so close. I think that on both sides, rhetoric has become very heated.
Joshua, I read it in the Wall Street Journal, I think a couple of days ago, that Turkey has asked the United States to pressure Maliki to kind of recognize the deals that Kurdistan has signed with more than 40 oil companies. Like the lion's share of those, the oil investment in Kurdistan is, of course, belongs to Turkey.
No, I think obviously there's a give and take that goes on here. I think Turkey is working very closely to influence U.S. policy. In the past, it was the other way around. We tried to influence Turkish policy on Iraq because Turkey had a red line that said we didn't want to discuss anything about the KRG. You can't use the word Kurdistan. Now it's almost opposite. Turkey is the one that's trying to find more ways of making the KRG more independent, more sovereign, and by empowering it with these oil deals. And the question is, has the end state of what these constitution looks like and what the sharing mechanism looks like for all the energy resources of Iraq that tend to be focused in the north but need to be shared throughout the entire country.
But you said the U.S. and Turkey are almost on the same page.
I would say they're working very closely together. There are, of course, differences, right? I think that Turkey at this point in time is particularly frustrated with the leadership in Baghdad. And I think the United States has many frustrations with Maliki.
When Maliki was here, like a lot of senators sent
yes.
letters to President Obama showing how frustrated they were with Maliki.
Yes, but I think at the end of the day, we have this problem in many places around the world, right? They may not be the perfect leader, they may not be the best leader, but they're the only leader we have to deal with right now. He was elected with his coalition. So the question is, how will the coalition in Baghdad and the coalition in Erbil work together? And I would argue that here, Turkey and the U.S. are on the same page, right? It's clear that KRG is the main silver lining, as I talk about in my report, the main bright spot for all of Iraq. And if Iraq and Baghdad and Maliki cannot understand this, then we need to figure out ways of continuing to support the KRG, but at the same time, we don't want to empower the KRG to the point where it goes to the point of no return, where there becomes another major divide in a way that I don't think internationally anyone wants to see. Because the Kurdish question is one that's much bigger than Iraq, it's much bigger than Syria, it's much bigger than Turkey and Iran, it's the entire region. And this is where I think the United States has a bigger view sometimes than the regional players.
Omar, what does Turkey want to achieve from its economic relations with KRG? I mean, in addition to the reason that he mentioned, they are helpful for the southeast of Turkey, where you have a lot of poor people, mostly Kurdish people, and they are now engaged in trade with the Kurdistan regional government. But additionally, what else is really what else do you see that Turkey might achieve in its relation with the KRG?
Well, Turkey is an energy independent country. It imports more than 90% of its energy from outside, and until today, so far, it has been mostly dependent on Russia and Iran for the energy imports. So over the last decade, Turkey's one of the main objectives in the foreign policy has been diversification of its energy sources and increasing its energy security. I think the oil and potentially gas coming from the Kurdish regions of Iraq, I think would greatly contribute to that purpose, and also Turkey's hope of becoming an energy hub, connecting the resource-rich east with the resource-poor west.
But aren't you afraid, as I'm not talking about you personally, the Turkish politicians or Erdogan, isn't he afraid that by empowering the Kurdistan region of Iraq, it's actually laying the foundations for an independent state in the north of Iraq?
I don't think they see it that way. I think they still feel that there's a long way till independent Kurdistan. I think they think that there's a still long way to go, that merely importing oil from Kurdish regions of Iraq, which would be connected to the already existing Kirkuk-Ceyhan pipeline, would not really embolden Kurds to seek greater independence.
Can I jump in here?
Sure.
I think one of the things is one of the lies that we've been told by Baghdad for a long period of time, both in the United States and in Turkey, is a strong KRG means a weak Iraq. I don't think that equation works anymore. I think in many ways a strong KRG could mean a strong Iraq, and I think that equation is very rarely discussed because we're only talking about government to government.
How can a strong KRG mean a strong Iraq? KRG almost disagrees with Baghdad on almost everything, from oil to land disputes to like the budget.
Let me give you concrete examples. I think that when money is involved and when there's economic development, all ships rise together. And I think in this case, the only way to solve some of the political problems is to create incentives for everyone. Right now, everyone is competing over certain scarce resources. Iraq has been blessed with many great resources as a nation. Unfortunately, sometimes resources become a curse. And I think the way you have to think about this is, how does Iraq as an entire whole think about its future? Are there ways for Kurdistan and its relative stability and the hotels, the tourism, the economic financial ability that's beginning to flow across the Turkish border, are there ways of extending that further south and being able to have Kurdish businessmen that become the interlocutors between the Arab south and the Turkish north, and going beyond, like my friend said, between east and west, becoming a bridge. I don't think anybody believes that a landlocked country like Kurdistan by itself, just the KRG, will survive in a neighborhood with such difficult neighbors that all want to see the demise of that state. However, if it becomes the engine of major growth in a country that we all hope succeeds, we think that the idea of Iraq, we think the idea of the KRG, but I think you're right, politicians don't have an incentive right now because most of the business, most of the economic opportunities, most of the jobs in KRG come from the government. Where are the private sector companies that are doing well? Where are the investors coming from? How do we encourage? I mean, most Americans would never think about the KRG as an area of investment. One of the things that we highlighted in the report is how important that is. The private sector in this country and in Turkey, others have to get involved. That's the way you really think about economic empowerment, because without that, you can't solve some of these very difficult questions.
It's very, very interesting, Joshua. Why don't you also, answer this question? Because for many people, Exxon-Mobil is an American company. It had a very lucrative, or maybe a much bigger oil deal with Baghdad. But it actually almost gave up that deal and went into deal with Kurdistan. Baghdad was eventually ended up blacklisting it. I don't know if it's still blacklisted or not. Why did Exxon-Mobil choose Kurdistan over Baghdad?
Yeah, I can't speak specifically to Exxon-Mobil. You have to ask them specifically. But I think the general premise of your question is basically, why is it so difficult to do business in Baghdad? When you look at the checks and balances, when you look at how difficult it is to do business, even getting a visa to go into Baghdad as an American businessman or a Turkish businessman is very difficult. Going into KRG, you're welcomed. When you come into the KRG, at least from the Turkish border that I've seen, there's a real welcoming and there's a real kind of entrepreneurial spirit. There's a different feeling there. And I think a lot of this comes with the fact that the KRG, we have to remember, the KRG didn't just develop on 2003. It wasn't just after the American invasion of Iraq. It was much earlier on, beginning in the 1990s onward. So in many ways, what we're seeing in KRG today could be the future of Iraq as a whole later on. It took a long period of time. It wasn't easy. It's not like the Kurds of northern Iraq were able to do this without a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. But in many ways, the benefits that they're getting, both economically and otherwise, begins because they've tried to make it easier to do business. They're very savvy when it comes to coming to Turkish companies and finding joint ventures to work together. And I think that's what's really changed. What's changed in Turkey is not only the domestic environment within Turkey that's allowed there to be a discussion in this way, but there's also real opportunity. Turkish businessmen are going to the Prime Minister saying, we want to do business in Kurdistan. The majority of business that's being done in the KRG today is coming from the Turkish side because not many other regional players are investing in the same way.
Definitely.
If I could chime in. I mean, I think the key point is here is that, as Joshua said, you're asking whether Turkey is not afraid of independent Kurdistan, more independent from the Baghdad, and isn't Turkey afraid of that? I think the key question is it's a landlocked state. It's a landlocked, and it is on its west. It has Syria, which is embroiled in civil war, and on its east you have Iran, and Turkey is the only viable energy route for.
So are you saying that a Kurdish state will never emerge if Turkey will not turn on the green light for us?
Well, I wouldn't put it as bluntly as like that, but I would say that Turkey, the perception in Turkey, I think the perception of the Turkish government is that KRG is replacing its dependence on Baghdad with dependence on me. So in the future,
and the KRG does seem to prefer to be dependent on Turkey rather than to be dependent on Baghdad.
But it gives more leverage to Turkey in that case. Turkey has more leverage in the sense that it can just close the pipeline, and then the Kurds have no other options. So I think that.
And Omar, why do you think your minister Yildiz, Minister of Energy in Turkey, he went to Baghdad to ask for Baghdad's permission in regard to these oil and gas deals that Turkey had entered with the KRG? But it didn't used to seek Baghdad's permission before. Is something changing in relations between Baghdad and Ankara?
I think so. Over the last couple of weeks or months, I think Turkey has been reviewing its overall foreign policy in the region. with Iran too, and even with regards to Syria, and Iraq is one of them. I think it is changing its relations with Baghdad. It is reviewing it. I think that's why I think it is trying to appease Baghdad. As you said, Turkey didn't used to do that. It just used to deal with Erbil, and it just it excluded Baghdad. I think this time, I think Turkey is trying to reconcile with Baghdad and saying that.
And Secretary of State John Kerry did welcome those developments in Turkey-Iraq relations when he met the Foreign Minister Davutoglu a couple of weeks ago.
No, I think this has been a critical component. For a very long time, the U.S. has been trying to work with Turkey to have a balanced policy here, where it's not one side or the other. One of the challenges I think that Turkey's had is, ever since the Arab Spring, or the so-called Arab Spring in the last couple of years, Turkish foreign policy has been, in some ways, always reactive to policies around its neighborhood. You know, it was the first official country in Tunisia and Egypt and other countries to welcome the new leaders that came in, and ever since the Egyptian coup, things have changed dramatically for Turkish foreign policy. Now, the zero problems with neighbors it used to have, it has problems with everybody except the KRG. So the key is there a way that, and this would never have been thought, 10 years ago when this policy was thought about, no one would have suspected that really the only neighbor they have no problems with is the very neighbor that was causing so much trouble then. So I think as a result, there's a way to figure out, okay, we may have gone too far with KRG, let's find a way to balance it. And I know this causes major concern in Erbil, and I think that there's a lot of discussion, but I think in many ways, when you go back to why these relations are becoming the way they are, they're from a pragmatic business point of view. You can't do business unless we find some way of incorporating Baghdad.
Joshua, there is some fears here in Washington about Turkish foreign policy over the past few years as well. The United States is not happy with the way Turkey's relations with Israel. It has not been happy in a number of other areas as well. But when days before he visited Washington, Foreign Minister Davutoglu of Turkey, he wrote an article in Foreign Policy saying that our relationship, our partnership with the United States, the values-based partnership. Why do you think he had to say that?
No, I think that what's interesting about it is many people have attributed the Justice and Development Party and Prime Minister Erdogan and Foreign Minister Davutoglu as being some type of Islamist who want to recreate the Ottoman Empire. In many ways, there has been that element where they have changed the entire focus of Turkey. Instead of being exclusively focused on the West and European Union and NATO membership, to being focused in a more 360 degree. They want to be part of all their neighbors. And the area that was always the weakest was always the Middle East. So it seems natural from an outside point of view, not from an ideological point of view, to focus on it. But I think that what you see with Foreign Minister Davutoglu's trip to Washington a couple weeks ago is very much a recalibration of understanding that during the Arab Spring, Turkey in many ways, I would say with due respect, was not as humble as it could have been. Oftentimes they would go to regions or capitals, even into Iraq or Kurdistan or other areas around the world, and they would bring their businessmen and everyone would say, we like Turkish soap operas, we like Turkish business, we are Turkish, etc. Then they would go back home, and then these same countries would come to America and say, can you help us from these Turks? They're trying to come back and be our big brothers. We don't want any more big brothers in the region. We want real partners. And I think in many ways what's happening is a natural recalibration of kind of the Turks learning in some ways the difficulty of living in their neighborhood, something that Americans have been humbled very severely over the last couple decades. And I think one of the questions is, what can the KRG-Turkish relationship help Turkish foreign policy? Because in many ways, you're right, there's a lot of areas that U.S. foreign policy and Turkish foreign policy do not agree on right now. The one area we can all agree on is on the KRG. And so I think learning from that relationship and figuring out how to apply those lessons to other areas for Turkey as it thinks about its relationship with Israel, with Syria, with Lebanon, Egypt, you name it. There's many areas to learn here. And I think this actually gives the KRG an opportunity. It's a small area.
Joshua, I think on that note, I'd have to take a short break. But after the short break, I would like to come back to dig deeper on this subject. Dear viewers, please stay with us. After a short commercial break, we will come back to discuss KRG-Turkish relations and its significance to the United States. Stay with us. Hello again and welcome back to Inside America. We're discussing the relationship between the Kurdistan regional government of Iraq and Turkey, and these relations have seen significant improvement over the past few years. But there seems to be one problem. Baghdad does not agree with independent oil deals that Kurdistan has signed with Turkey, including a recent multi-billion-dollar oil and gas deal with Ankara. I would like to find out what the United States stance is on this subject. Joshua, you said it earlier that Turkey and the United States seem to be on the same page, on a similar page, in regard to the KRG relations. So, are you trying to say that despite the stated objections of the U.S. government, the United States is supportive of the relationship?
I think I would say this. I think that the policy that the United States and Washington and the State Department and White House that you've talked about have had on this oil deal has been there for a very long time. There's probably a feeling that there needs to be a change at some point, and negotiations need to be underway. And I think in many ways the Turks have made very convincing and strong arguments to the United States and to Washington. I think there's a lot of conversation, and this has become a major issue that the U.S. and Turkey can work together on. And I think in many ways the U.S.'s role here is not to be the one that solves it, but to facilitate the discussions. Because right now many of the players are having their own conversations. You talked about Energy Minister Yildiz going to Baghdad to have his conversation. You had Erdogan and Barzani talking on themselves. But how can you bring everyone together? And I think the United States has been trying to find different mechanisms that are both trilateral and other formats to have these conversations. So I think the U.S., while having a stated official policy, is also trying to be very pragmatic here. And I suspect that the policies behind the scenes are much closer than officially stated.
Omar, you've been in Washington for quite a while, and you work for the Century Foundation. Can you tell me, from your perspective, that should the United States support the KRG-Turkey relationship? As he says, the KRG-Turkey rapprochement should not necessarily be at the expense of Baghdad-Ankara relations.
No, I think so, and I think Turkey has realized that. I think Turkey and U.S. on this position, as Joshua said, they're on a similar page, but they didn't used to be. And I think U.S. pushed Turkey to be on a similar page with itself. I think Turkey doesn't view its relations with KRG as a zero-sum game anymore. I think it thinks that Baghdad can have an important role as well, because the rest of Iraq is also economically very important for Turkey. Just yesterday, Energy Minister Yildiz talked about the potential pipeline from Basra to Ceyhan, from taking oil from the southern fields all the way to Ceyhan. So I think. But
here, it's not just Turkey. There are other countries who are interested in Iraq. Iran, for example. It's Iran that has most influence in the south and center of Iraq, where the Shias dominate politics and everything else, basically. Will Iran really be happy with Turkish, push to the rest of Iraq?
It may not be, but I'm not sure to what extent can Iran prevent that from happening. If Turkey, with the support of the United States, would agree to be part of such an agreement. I think I think the U.S.'s position again would be the most critical one, and I'm not sure to what extent Iran would prevent such a thing. But again, I think I think Turkey's position.
Can we say that? I mean, the U.S., despite its stated objections to the KRG-Turkey oil deals, it has definitely turned a blind eye to it, or it has at least been unsuccessful in stopping Turkey from developing its relation with the Kurdistan regional government. Can we say now the United States realizes that Kurdistan can play an important role for Turkey to be the central player in Iraq rather than Iran, which the United States is worried about?
I think it is possible, but I think I look at the issue a little different than Joshua. Actually, I think it wasn't the U.S. that dramatically shifted its position, but it was rather Turkey that shifted its position vis-a-vis its relations with KRG and Baghdad. I think US's as far as I can see, US's position is almost the same. That you cannot do independent oil deals with KRG that would damage the.
But why hasn't it done anything to stop those relationships? Doesn't the United States have any leverage on KRG, on Turkey? They both self-described U.S.
I think
allies.
we are seeing the leverage right now. I think Turkey is moving closer to US's position on that. Last month, the energy minister Yildiz said that Turkey will not import any oil without the approval of Baghdad. He said that, and then earlier this month he traveled to Baghdad. We didn't used to see that last year.
Let me bring in Joshua. Joshua, he's right that Yildiz told the reporters that the approval of Baghdad is key. But also, like other officials have privately told media outlets, including Reuters, that even if Baghdad does not give green light to those oils, Turkey will still go ahead with them.
Look, at the end of the day, I think that this tension that we're talking about is actually healthy, and it's a good thing. You know, you ask, why doesn't the United States stop it? Yes, if the United States put all of its effort into one area, they could really do damage to the Turkish, KRG deal. But it's not against the U.S. interest. In many ways, it helps together. It helps leverage go higher in Baghdad. When you look at a government in Baghdad that has not done as well as the KRG has in providing basic services to its people, it seems natural that people are going to look towards the KRG and say, look, we want to be more like that. And I think your question earlier about where does Iran figure into this is an important one, because Iran is the real spoiler here. I don't look at Turkey or the U.S. as being the spoiler in KRG-Baghdad relations. Iran is the real piece here. And I think what the United States is worried about is, to what extent is Maliki an Iraqi prime minister, and what extent is he a Shia prime minister? And I think we all know that there are different tensions and different factions, and the balance has to be just right in Iraq for that system to work. And I think with what's happening right now with the United States and Iran in terms of this historic nuclear deal, it's going to be very interesting to watch, because that's only one piece of the larger.
I would like to hear your perspective. Has he been more a Shia prime minister or an Iraqi one over the past few years?
Thankfully, I'm not an Iraqi expert on these things, but I would say that what I am concerned about when I see Prime Minister Maliki, the way he talks, he does not appear to represent all of Iraq. And I think that's very problematic to me. When I talk to people from the KRG and other officials, they don't see a reflection of themselves. And I understand these factions need to have different points of view, but he also has to be pragmatic. In the same way that Prime Minister Erdogan may not be Kurdish himself, many people have embraced him, and he works very closely with the Kurdish party in Turkey. This is a very important lesson for Prime Minister Maliki. If he wants to solve and work within a larger and a more powerful and a more economically prosperous Iraq, he's going to have to work with Mr. Barzani. He's going to have to work with the KRG. And I think in many ways the question for all outsiders is, how do we create the condition in which domestic and kind of normal politics can come back to Baghdad, and it won't be this situation where the politics of Iraq are happening in Tehran or Ankara or DC.
I'd like to shift a little bit from this subject to how Turkey responded to Barzani's recent visit to Diyarbakir. It was a historic visit. Shivan Perwer, the famous Kurdish singer, was in Diyarbakir for the first time in 37 years. Can you tell me what the domestic reaction in Turkey was?
Well, it was mostly seen as a historic event, and interestingly, there wasn't much public backlash against it. I think many people just saw it as a legitimate and a positive development, even for the future of Turkey's Kurds and for the resolution of Turkey's Kurdish problem. Of course, the ultra-nationalists were not really happy. They see Barzani as the sponsor of terrorism, and then they were not happy about Erdogan using the word Kurdistan. But overall, I think, interestingly, I think Turkey, the population's response was very positive.
It seems to me that this relationship between the KRG and Turkey is mostly economic. Isn't that really a textbook example for how economics drive politics?
I agree with you. I think that you're right in the sense that the economy is what's changed the dynamics. But I actually think there's a lot more here. What's interesting is when you look at the historic visit you're talking about, what's so interesting is the cultural affinity, the cultural similarities between the Turkish population and the Kurdish population. For so long they've lived together. And in many ways, they're far more similar than many of the other countries and many of the other peoples of the region. And there's something within the DNA of my Turkish friends. When you put on a Kurdish song, they can't help but begin to think and sing in the same old time. So yes, I think the economics are an important driver, and that's what's really changed the politics. But there is something else there, and I think that the religious element, I think the cultural element, all these elements are there, and I don't think that any one of them can be downgraded. But I think if I had to put my finger on one issue, I would agree with you. It's about the economy.
I mean, culture definitely plays a role. Maybe Omar can talk about that better. For example, in Kurdistan, most people watch Turkish soap operas. Most people wear Turkish suits, Turkish clothes, Turkish water, you know, like everything is Turkish. I think more than 80% of all our imports come from Turkey. Can you tell me what your perception is about that?
No, I agree with that. I mean, I think the old reflexes of the Turkish people are gone, at least to a great extent. You know, people. Not that long ago, 20 years ago, when you talked about Kurds, you know, you would be considered, the chances that you would be, you know, considered as a separatist and a terrorist, you know, a supporter of terrorists. I think that is gone. I think the society, they always live together, but I think the identity of Kurdishness, I think it is becoming increasingly accepted among the Turkish public.
Can I just add one thing on this?
I'd like to take another short break, but
Please.
after this break we will come back to really discuss the subject further. Dear viewers, please stay with us. We'll be back shortly after the break to discuss the Turkey-KRG relationship. Hello again and welcome back to Inside America. Joshua, we've discussed a lot of things from Erdogan's personality to KRG, Turkey relations, to Turkish foreign policy, the zero problems foreign policy, how it has collapsed. I would like now to know what kind of role does this Turkish KRG rapprochement play in solving Iraq's domestic problems? You know, there are huge land and oil disputes between Baghdad and Erbil, or the Kurdistan region. Can you tell me about that?
No, I think in the past you would have thought that a closer Turkish-KRG relationship meant that there was no relationship between Baghdad and Ankara, and I think that that's not necessarily correct. When you look at where a lot of the political leaders of Iraq are going to be trained, actually that's happening in Ankara very often. Many of the leadership, whether it's Maliki's party or other parties, they are coming to Turkey to learn different things. Turks are sending policemen, court justices, etc., to try to help this. And I think in many ways, Turkey has a very important role to play in Iraq's future, because in many ways, Turkey is the most powerful economy in the region. It's actually one of the largest connectors. It is the NATO member that's in this region of the world. It's an EU aspirant country. If you want a connector, if you want Iraq to be connected to the markets of the West, where the majority of foreign direct investment is going to come from, it has to go through Turkey. And so in many ways, if Turkey does not work very closely to solve the domestic issues of Iraq, it becomes very quickly a domestic problem for Turkey as well. And so in many ways, there needs to be a work together. And I think Turkey can help Erbil and KRG work more closely with Baghdad. And I think KRG can help Turkey in some ways work with Baghdad. Not to capitulate and not to be 100% for Baghdad or 100% for Erbil, but to find a middle ground. And I think this is where Turkey and the KRG need to be working together. And I think this is where the U.S., quite frankly, has a very large interest to play here.
I know Joshua earlier mentioned that the relationship between Turkey and KRG and Turkey and Baghdad are not necessarily mutually exclusive. So, but does that, you know, I can't really imagine having KRG in good terms with Baghdad, in good terms with Turkey, Turkey in good terms with Baghdad, but KRG and Turkey in bad terms with each other. Like the enemy of your enemy is your friend, the friend of your friend should be your friend, right? Can you tell me what are you going to see basically in KRG-Baghdad relations if Turkey improves its relation with Baghdad?
Well, I think the recent approach of Turkey, as I said, is different from its previous approach. It is less confrontational towards Baghdad. I think it it creates the chance to facilitate the rapprochement between Erbil and Baghdad too. I think that Turkey does not see its relation with Erbil as mutually exclusive with its relations with Baghdad. I think it also creates the chances for the incentive for Erbil to work together with Baghdad and vice versa, and for Baghdad to work with Erbil.
And I would think, just to reinforce this point, the enemy of my enemy is my friend is the old Turkish mentality. In other words, they were going to be friends with the KRG because they thought that would hurt Baghdad in some ways. But I think in the process of having that relationship, there's become an understanding that revenge politics in this region of the world never ends. Just like when you have a tribe that fights another tribe and you keep on killing brother after brother, it never ends.
But Joshua, if Turkey improved its relations with Baghdad, it already has good relation with the KRG.
Yeah.
Like something dramatic is likely to should happen at least between KRG and Baghdad as well. I mean, these relations, can they remain as they are?
I think you're right in the sense that right now the KRG-Turkish relations are at a historic high, and maybe Baghdad-Ankara relations were at a historic low. But I think we're beginning to see an evening out. You're right. They can't stay like this forever, right? But there is a real strong economic incentive to keep the KRG-Turkish relations strong at the same time that political relations are repaired between Turkey and Iraq and between KRG and the central government. Because if you don't repair those central relations and you don't fix the political situation, the economic success cannot continue. No investor from the United States, no investor from the West, no investor from Turkey is going to invest in a KRG that's not a sovereign state yet. The question is, how do you bring those together? The success is based on there being political success in the future. It doesn't happen at the same time. You first need to have economic success, stability, and then lead into political. But if there's no progress on the political, we have nothing to look at.
So why does KRG seem to trust Turkey more than it does Baghdad?
I mean, I think in many ways this is where the politics of the enemy is my friend type of situation. I think they've noticed for a very long period of time, the closer they get to Ankara and to the prime minister, it gives them an option, meaning the prime minister of Turkey. It gives them options against Maliki. When Maliki tries to squeeze and tries to push them, they basically say, look, you keep on pushing us like this, not only are you going to lose us, you're going to lose us to Turkey. And in many ways, this will empower this larger regional fear that everyone seems to have of what happens to the largest people group in the world that don't have their own state. This is a real issue that I think everyone in the region is very concerned about.
With the Kurdish people in Syria making really unprecedented advances in the north of the country, they have already declared an autonomous region similar to what we have in Iraq. Do you expect like the emergence of a Kurdish state in Syria or in Iraq anytime soon?
Well, I think it's still too early to say anything definitive. I think they have, on the ground, they have definitely established their de facto autonomy, but whether this would turn into a legal or whether this would get a recognition is entirely another question, I think. But right now, they have consolidated their positions in the Kurdish provinces, but they have a lot of challenges too. They are not surrounded by friends. They are surrounded by actual enemies. Turkey opposes that.
But the enemies are weak. Like Baghdad is really weak. Syria is in trouble. Iran is internationally isolated. What can really they do about a Kurdish state?
Well, you still have Turkey, and you still have a Turkey-friendly KRG, and I think the KRG and Turkey has found a mutual ground on Syria, meaning that containing PYD. I think Barzani and Prime Minister Erdogan are on the same page on the need to keep PYD at bay. I think there's a mutual. So I think it is not only
they have failed to.
They have,
right.
Yes, true, but it.
But I think one of the things is I would actually say if things continue the way they are, I cannot see a state in which Syria remains a strong state. It looks much more like Iraq of the 1990s, where you have an illegitimate dictator that stays in power, but autonomous zones that are created. The fundamental difference in this case, I think, is that the Kurdish region of the north of Syria is very divided internally as well, between those who are much more Islamically fundamentalist.
We were divided as well in northern Iraq.
Exactly.
Remember, we had a civil war for 4 years.
Well, so if 25 years from now everything stays the same, then yes, I think it would be very legitimate to see that. But The difference, I think, in this case is they don't have the same resources, they don't have the same support. You had the support of the United States all during this period of time to keep Saddam Hussein and his forces out of it. So in other words, we created a de facto punishment for the dictator in that sense.
I would like also to understand the U.S. Position on the declaration of autonomy by the Kurds in Syria. I mean, I read the statement by the State Department, and also U.S. Ambassador to Syria said something, but they were not really strong condemnations, you know. The State Department statement, for example, it basically just said, we are against this because there are other peoples, other non-Kurdish peoples who have to have a say in that decision. There was no strong opposition towards it.
Thankfully, I'm not in the U.S. government, so I don't have to answer it. I agree with you, actually. I think that it's really been disappointing as a private citizen to look at the lack of strong positions that the United States has taken here. First, we looked like we were about to bomb Syria. We were going to punish them for using chemical weapons. Then we backed off. And I think our friends in Turkey are very unhappy with us. Turkey has been trying to take a very strong line on this issue. And I think what's happening now between the United States and Russia with the inspectors in Syria is a short-term solution, but there's a long-term problem we have here. And I think the question is, you said that the enemies of the northern part of Syria are weak. I would say its friends are also very weak. So in this situation, it's which weaker party will succeed. And I think here's a place where if the Turkish and KRG government were able to come up with some type of idea of saying, look, we don't see this as a threat. We want to find some type of federal and autonomous region here. I actually think that the United States and other European powers would eventually go along with that same idea. But neither the KRG or Turkey is talking about this right now because Turkey feels threatened by the elements that are in the KRG currently.
Joshua, just one more question. So are you basically saying that, or can we draw the conclusion from the fact that we didn't see a strong opposition from the United States to the PYD's declaration of autonomy in Syria, as that that autonomy, that declaration of autonomy might not be in the interest of Turkey, but it's not directly against the interests of the United States?
You know, I think that because things are so fluid in Syria right now, you can declare anything you want. The different Islamic factions have declared an Islamic State of Syria. They've done a lot of declarations. I think with what the PYD has done, figuring out how connected they are to the PKK element, a terrorist organization that everyone around the world recognizes as a terrorist organization, is the key factor here. And as long as Turkey is not crossing the border with its troops to eliminate the PYD, I think the United States will continue to follow the lead here. And I think we continue to respect the sovereignty of these different nations, but I think the realities on the ground are changing so quickly, anything could happen.
Omar, I'd like to ask you the last question. I remember in 2003, Turkey was as worried about the Kurdistan regional government in Iraq when the United States wanted to invade Iraq as it is now about the emergence of an autonomous zone in Syria. But eventually, as we have been discussing it, Turkey came to terms with the KRG and it has developed its relations to a friendly level. Are we going to see the same thing between the Kurdish region of Syria and Turkey?
I mean, it is definitely possible, but I don't see it happening in the near future. I mean, the difference between KRG and what happened in 2003 and now is that KRG was dominated by, KDP and PUK, which are not PKK. Turkish state has been engaged in a war with the PKK for the last 3 decades. I think so. We should differentiate between PKK and the PYD and what was KDP and PUK. I think that, but of course, in the future, you never know if the peace process continues and if Turkey solves its Kurdish question, then you might have that chance. But as I said, I think Joshua made the great point that the natural resources, they don't have oil. So I think Turkey has less incentive to engage the way it did with the KRG in the northern Syria.
Omar Zapli, thank you so much for that great note. It's a great note to really end our discussion here. Omar Zapli, you are with the Century Foundation. Thank you so much again for being with us today. Joshua Walker, a writer who has recently written an extensive report about Turkey-KRG relations and their significance to the United States. Thank you so much for talking through that as well. Dear viewers, thank you so much for watching. Until next time, be well.